Welcome to the Digital Digest, brought to you by the Digital Disruptors. It's your weekly update on tips, tricks, and news. And of course, we are going to be covering more on our agentic AI agenda, because that's kind of the thing that we've been talking about over the last few weeks. And I'm delighted to say that I'm joined by Indy, who normally doesn't get a look in on these, but we've kicked Ryan out and we've brought Indy into the fold because, well, let's be honest, she's more interesting to listen to, and she's got some really great ideas and thoughts on what's happening at the moment in this space. So Indy, how are you doing this morning? You good?
I am slightly under the weather still,
Oh
actually.
no.
As you know, I was away for the last couple of days. I'm still away, but I picked up a bug, which is the worst thing when you're away from home and with child, and then carrying some sort of head cold. But for you, I have peeled myself away from bed to talk about agentic AI.
Oh, you're such a trooper. Thank you very much. And you and I have been talking about this for quite a while now, and I guess the reason for getting you on is because you've been doing some really exciting things when you're exploring the opportunities, exploring the art of the possible, I guess. And also, I think what probably makes you a little bit different to a lot of people that I'm talking to is that you're not really doing too much with ChatGPT, because you've been using models like Claude and other things. So maybe just give a little bit of background about why you've been exploring this, and why you've been choosing different models rather than ChatGPT, if it's for any particular reason.
Yeah. So the reverse context of this is that um, Bankable had gone through a major restructure in the last year and a half, and that's partly because we were moving more towards lending and less on banking as a service and the infrastructure, and that was largely born out of a trend to do with markets across the pond, where that dependency on critical infrastructure was starting to pull back a little bit, because anyone that was in the critical infrastructure supply chain was a risk to
Mhm.
whoever you were working, whatever project you were working on. So, for example, with a lot of these payment programs, and one of the things that we spotted was that we were very fortunate that AI came out in the way that it did. A lot of the work that we had done before was to recruit different data scientists, data analysts that could work on different types of models. And in particular, in even in banking infrastructure and payment programs, where you're trying to piece together the different components of like a payment program. And we've got quite a few of these players in our market who are working on, on issuing cards, and usually those are linked to their software interface of um, making sure that you can see the payments that are being made or need to be paid, for instance, for like expenses, etc.
Yeah.
But the whole process around the card issuing was the thing that we looked at as something that could be repeatable, rather than trying to design from scratch a program. How could you automate some of that?
Mhm.
And then on top of that, how could you use AI in underwriting? And not so much that we would handle the underwriting, but that the underwriting metrics are surfaced based on all of your
Yeah.
properties. So that was the reverse context of it. And then I think from there, we decided the best thing was to review our company structure and to see if we were fit for purpose for the new world we wanted to bring on.
Mhm.
And the truth is that we have like really great payments experts, really great people that understand the technology components of lending, but we didn't have a lot of people that could piece together the functions to translate what needed to happen from the business to the technology. And anyone that knows me is known that, like, that is a function that I would call as product. And I hold product in like this highest regard, almost like everyone's on a podium.
Yeah.
But the problem is that we had so many different product people, and yet we weren't able to get to the point where it was still translated quick enough into business requirements. So
Yeah.
the real shift for us was looking at the functions where they could be enhanced with AI first, and then looking at how that could sit on the organization structure.
Yeah.
So, for example, we have product members now, and we have people that work in marketing, or someone that handles, on the payment side, understands the execution of like a payment program. How can we make their job easier by then looking at the way an agent could perhaps like report to that function? And that's where we started.
There's a lot going on there, right? And I guess what's quite interesting to hear is that you're almost looking to try to bring that kind of startup vibe back to Bankable by using these agents to bring some more agility through the product, right? In terms of giving getting that speed to market accelerated, or even just get that ideation and that ability to do more with less, if you like, and which is always a challenge, because Bankable, a business that's grown through acquisition and growing
Mm.
organically as well. And the problem with growing is that you do tend to lose your agility over time, just because of the function of having more bodies in a business and stuff.
Why we had to go through something that was at least a restructure of thought, a restructure of business model, and bringing people together um, in a way that allowed us to optimize the efforts that we were making. So we
Mm.
started, I mean, to be honest, we didn't pick on big roles to begin with. We actually picked on things that were like problems that we had in the business, like if we were looking who would review the contracts, for instance. And we had, at the point where we were merging, we had a full-time legal counsel. That was not something that we wanted to continue, because it didn't quite work for even the mechanics of getting the deal across the line. So one of the things that we did was look at different agents that we could then already off the shelf take and play with, rather than doing
Yeah.
anything ourselves. But again, using that in a way that that one depended on OpenAI's technology, and so it was a version of GPT, ChatGPT within it, but they've enhanced it by adding a lot more legal documentation and trained their model a lot better. So then that
Okay.
was one of the ways that we thought about, um, having that software reporting to a person whose role it is to review all the contracts and to make sure that all the terms of the contracts are consistent with what our expectations are. And then we
Yeah.
went a little bit deeper and started looking at how, as a team, we could start to optimize certain roles like content creation, because I think that's always a pain. And I think it's
Yeah.
the first logical one that most people want to go to.
It's
We,
it's
as
the
a,
classic use case for ChatGPT, right? Like, everyone's kind of gone to content creation
yeah,
marketing as a way of making it a bit easier, especially in the accounting space, right? Because we're not very innovative, exciting thinkers sometimes.
and I think there's like a lot of merit in terms of using the GPT to create the content. I am not as big a fan as that, because I think that it lacks original thought. And my one um, bugbear is when I read an article that says cutting edge technology, you might as well tell me ChatGPT wrote this. So I always look out for anyone that writes the words cutting edge technology, because we're not born in the 80s anymore. So, oh,
Okay,
actually, we
note
were.
to self to make sure I remove those kind of comments next time I post.
Yeah, so I think there's merit in using GPT to help you have some injection of creativity.
Yeah.
Um, but then again, when you look at the like marketing as a function, the most interesting articles you would tend to pick on are very fact based. So you want something that then has maybe stats. Stats are really helpful. And I think GPT is creative, but can be a bit loosey goosey with maybe what it might quote as a stat. I prefer Perplexity for that. It's really good at being able to model out stats or facts or numbers from different geographies. So if you're trying to
Yeah.
find a comparative for your, like, a problem that exists in the marketplace and why it's a problem, and you want it quantified, I would use Perplexity for that. So
So
I think there's some, yeah.
so tell me about the process of getting from using ChatGPT and starting up that thought process, and then ending up with Perplexity and finding that it gives you better, more reliable results and things. Is that down to research, or is that down to experimentation, or is it just, how did you get there?
Yeah, a bit of both actually. So one was asking the GPTs, asking the Perplexities, asking them themselves, what are you the best in the world at compared to the others, and why would I use you? So I think one part of research is using the software to ask to answer the questions. And you really have to do it for your own use case. I mean, I'm looking at payments, payment infrastructure for lending. So for me, I really need to ask it based on my use case. I can't
Hmm.
answer it for a generic use case. Maybe I can answer it if I was saying, okay, well, what's better at data processing and reconciliations, in in terms of small tasks like, and then insert here, it's as good as your prompt. So I
Yeah.
just, maybe it's just a simple way of looking at it. One is I asked them themselves for my use case. Two is I fed them a use case. So I actually wanted them to give me the result of how they would answer the question on a particular need that I had. So
Yeah.
hyper specific in terms of data checking. And it was like in this case, I wanted something basic that was like, okay, well, how would you go about the validation process of checking that these numbers match these numbers over here, and that if there is an error, that you would then escalate based on these types of other circumstances or criteria for missing data in that repayment collection process. So feeding it something and then saying, how would you build this to be an AI agent? And seeing what answers came out. And to be honest with you, the best answer came from Gemini because it was super comprehensive,
Mm.
in terms of what it said, how you could build it, what platform you would build it on. And
Yeah.
it would even go so far as to build it for you if you prompted it in that way. So that was what I thought was really interesting. It's like I went back to the AIs. I thought, okay, now I know which ones are good for me on things like automating content creation
Yeah.
versus things like injecting a little bit of creativity into the writing, or versus things like data processing, and then again going right the way through to configuring the agent for repayment checking and collections.
So it sounds like you basically interviewed the GPTs.
It did. I was very I was very good at making sure that they did their job and they had to answer to me, and I didn't even have to give them a bonus afterwards for their answers.
Absolutely. Tell me a little bit more about, you've used them for doing some of the underwriting work, or at least some of the underwriting research and stuff. And again, how's that sort of fit into the process? Has that been a natural fit, or is that, oh, you had to work to adopt practices to make that a little bit easier?
Do you know? I can't tell you the answer to that one, John. I'm afraid. I would love to be able to tell you, but I was talking to a few. I've been talking to many fintechs over the last few weeks because of how we work with fintechs, and underwriting is everyone's secret sauce. Um, the one thing I would say is, uh, it starts first by knowing your own thresholds and model, and then making sure you've got the right kinds of data points in place. The GPT or any AI, sorry, is only as good as the data you're feeding it and the thresholds that
Yep.
you understand. And maybe there's some factors that it can take into consideration based on, like, um, data or information that you take from some of the big ratings agencies, um, on default ratios or what you should factor in. But because though we provide and procure the underwriting metrics, ultimately the credit decision is made by the person who is taking the credit risk.
Hmm.
So they do the underwriting. That in our world, what we do is we do a really good job of making sure that open data is accessible and that it's understood in a range of strategies. And I think that's what we understand is that in the past, strategies have had to be super broad, and they can
Yeah.
only be like, okay, a handful of strategies, because it's a manual process to match lending or match money to a strategy. So there's a lot of manual processing that happens in the middle. You almost want to make it as simple as red, amber, green.
Right.
Maybe
Yeah.
that's oversimplifying, but if you go to a lot of fintechs that have, alternative finance, for instance, the criteria that you do try and build up as many credit buckets as possible. But beyond a certain point, it's very difficult to have as many credit buckets as you want, because there's only so much time and effort you want to put into manually servicing smaller things that fall outside of your red, amber, green, or your optimal number of credit buckets.
Yeah.
The great thing with AI is that it allows you to extend the number of credit buckets that you have by being a little bit more. Um, it's like a menu card. Suddenly, instead
Yeah.
of going and looking at the menu card and seeing, okay, you can have the steak tartare, the I don't know, sword for the less, instead of just having the fish and the vegan option, which is often the best one on the menu, instead of just having to take a little bit from the steak tartare, a little bit from the swordfish, and a little bit of the vegetables from the vegan option, and then you have a whole new financing product that fits a certain like a certain proportion of the market as well. I think that's
Yeah.
where we're only at the start of that. We're only really just getting to the fact that strategies could be hyper dynamic, real time, and they can manage risk instantaneously, so
Hmm.
that everyone should be able to get the types of like access to credit or access to lending that they've never had before.
Yeah. Is that allowing people to diversify them, because you can diversify in product, but you can also potentially diversify in risk, because you may, like you say, every business is going to have a risk threshold, and you're going to have a set of lending criteria that we're willing to lend against. But if you can extend that risk threshold or that criteria into another lending product that maybe you wouldn't have considered previously, is that the opportunity here as well?
Yeah, I think there's like, for instance, we see a lot of these revenue-based finance companies that tend to cover the forward sale of receivables, and that's a really good example that most of them are only covering the receivables, but equally there's an opportunity to finance the payables. So
Yeah.
and it's logical that they should touch both sides of the coin. And I think that's something that we as Bankable have obviously got a really good grasp of because of the Arex days.
Hmm.
But I think moving forward, we've also understood a lot more about the market mechanics in terms of alternative finance when we first started out and who was in this space.
Yeah.
And the players that have really accelerated, and the ones that have then the new ones that have come on the scene, and then how do they make their business model work? It's a lot of shift that's happened. But one of the things that's clear is that the fintechs that are doing well post the fintech winter are doing really well, and they have amassed a huge amount of data. Now it's about them being able to go a step further and and be able to offer different types of lending products in the marketplace. And I think that's going to be a pattern that we continue to see for the next few years.
Yeah, makes sense. And what other things are you experimenting with at the moment, or what other things are you trying out? And what kind of results are you getting? It doesn't have to be necessarily bankable related, because I know you kind of playing around a little bit this from a personal point of view and things like that.
Yeah, so we started looking at a way that you could post more like content um, from a like a basic Google document, and that you could then have something that could be triggered through Slack as the initiator to
Mhm.
then create or notify the agent that would be like the AI marketer. Um, so there's one part of that I looked at, and I can talk about the way that is publicly available out there that people could look up actually themselves and see if they want to use it.
Yeah.
But then, yeah, you're right. I started playing with it a little bit differently to then try and understand how to configure our own agents and using that in a way that works, for personally, professionally, whatever hat I wear. But the one that I'll talk about is like, there's one that you can do using Airtable. Um, and that's like the core place you would go to. Is linked to NA10, which is like a form of like a Zapier, I guess. So I'm
Mhm.
trying to make it a little bit more familiar, but it is like that. It just configures like different software tools together. But using Airtable, you could create your flow to then have something that links to the Slack prompt. Now, of
Yeah.
course, you have to feed into your you'd have to feed into your model of choice, and you could choose any like AI in that one. But let's say you choose Claude Anthropic, because that one's quite a good one for this use case. You'd have to train it into say to know what your prompts are. So if you're saying create new video or create content or index content, that it needs to know what it's doing with it. So you're linking what is then um, the means of like the prompt to Airtable, to Slack, to then also when you go into Slack, and you're able to then sort of say, again, depending on the type of content, let's say if it's video content, you could use something like a HeyGen, which
Yes.
is just like a picture of yourself, and it would then automatically record it. And that's not new. I mean, obviously, we've seen it for the last year. Um, and used fairly successfully now. They're doing a good job of being able to make it hyper realistic. The
Yes.
one thing that you could do then is um, in Airtable, you can upload all your previous content. Let's say, for example, taking a use case of um, the podcast, and we've covered lots of news, for instance, on Free Agent, and we've covered
Yeah.
lots of news on Genesis, and and some of the other ones that we spend a lot more time with, but also we're quite broad, right? With like Mimo, with
Yeah.
Apron, and whatnot, the other fintechs that are out there. So let's say we index all of that content, and then we want to create a summary video that is just of all of the changes they've made to their software in the last 6 months. We could then create a prompt within Slack to say, create me content on, you know, anything to do with the tag of, Apron payments, let's say.
Yeah.
And it would then go back through the database of content that you've got to then pull back a piece of content that can be written, for instance, so that you can, approve it, or you can look at what it is that before it triggers the video, and then you can then prompt it and then say, now create me the video from this, and it would automatically go and create the video for you to review. So it's almost like you're talking to an employee in Slack. And then you can even go a step further. And if you've linked it to your socials like LinkedIn and Twitter, it will then go and publish that content for you and create like the content, the kind of text to go with it. So that's like something that's publicly available. And I think we could share the link probably for that so that people can have a play themselves. I always think it's really helpful if you really get to grasp or get to grips with it.
Hmm.
It won't take long. It takes about an hour for you to learn it. And yeah, I think it's a huge way of changing the way that your business can like work with people who work within it, maybe whose role isn't content marketing, or maybe they or, and then the marketer, but they just need extra resources. Well, this is like a junior employee in one, actually a fairly good team of junior employees that can then report into your one person who sits in the firm.
Yeah, it makes total sense. Makes total sense. Well, Indy, I think that's great timing because we're finishing at 9, so bang on. So perfect time to wrap up. And as you said, there's so many opportunities here, and clearly, what you're doing with Bankable and the opportunities that we could use for the podcast and to do other things, are almost endless, right? I keep talking about the fact that your opportunities when it comes to using AI are sort of like your only limitation is your imagination in terms of what you can utilize. So yeah, we'll wrap up there. Thank you very much for joining us, and hopefully it's not the first and last time, and we'll make sure that you get on more than Ryan does. And yeah, and if anyone's got any comments or thoughts, please add them in the chat on YouTube or LinkedIn. If you want us to cover anything else, you got any queries, or you just want to like steal Indy's knowledge and take it into your business, then I'm sure you can reach out and get that from us. But until next time, we will see you next week.
Thank you.
Awesome.
So we had like one person who came for about 1 minute.